Hi, and welcome to AmalgamNation presents World of Fictioncraft, the Northrend Chronicles, Part 2. Before I get started, I just want to say that I'm going to be making a couple of little changes to this, as some of them were suggested by the author of this fanfiction, and another one is just something that I'm planning to do because it makes it simpler for me. The first change is I'm just going to put up a still image and have that instead of gameplay footage. If you like the gameplay footage, please comment below the vid to say that you'd like me to put gameplay footage in there. I cannot recreate the events that take place in the story accurately, but I can put in some background gameplay footage so that you can see things happening on the screen. And the other change that I'm going to be making is rather than trying to edit my voice to sound like a particular character or anything like that, I'm just going to read this and edit the sound to give myself an echoey voice, because when I think of Northrend, I think of Death Knights, and when I think of Death Knights, I think of their voice which has an echo to it. At least to me it has an echo to it. Sorry for the long introduction there. I'll get on with the story now. The day of the battle for Light's Hope Chapel, the afternoon. Yes, sir, she's been quiet this whole time, not muttering so much as a sound. It's highly unnerving, sir. The report given by the guard on the captive was certainly a strange one. Plate armour clanked as they walked uphill. That's not the only thing, muttered his companion. Indeed, the few that had seen her had certainly made comment about her appearance. It wasn't long before it was required that he be the one to interrogate her. The crowd of three walked up the stairs to the stone chapel. Acros loomed overhead, a constant reminder of the events that transpired only a few hours ago. The wooden doors were parted, revealing a dimly lit area, pews disregarded to the side, and an old podium lying on the floor. A hastily built cage stood in the centre. It seemed spacious given it only contained one occupant, and as the tree drew closer it became apparent why she was on her own. There was no mistaking the sickly pallor and white, even if muck-ridden hair, nor could it be missed that after a few seconds of observation the telltale signs of life were missing. She was not breathing. This was a Death Knight. She had given no indication that she had received company, staring bleakly downcast at the dirty floor, garbed in little more than leg padding and a dirty and quite frankly oversized shirt. The guard on the left shifted slightly beside them. His discomfort was apparent, and the knight captain could understand why. Emitting no minute movement or sounds gave the impression of a lifeless doll, but given that the guards present had been among those to find the girl crying out and writhing in the mud far from the battlefield earlier on, it was evident why this stark contrast would be unnerving. Thank you, men. I will take it from here. She didn't move. He dismissed his companions out of sheer sympathy for their nerves. Everyone was still on edge following earlier today, and the new truce between the Argent Dawn and newly founded Knights of the Ebon Blade was still in question. It would take more than a couple of speeches to convince everyone of newly placed loyalties, and this Death Knight would be no exception. Having their kind around them was bound to put them at unrest, given they were battling the very same soldiers only this morning. Hearing the doors close, he crouched down, armour creaking, reaching her eye level. She sat to the back of the cage, knees drawn up and face barely visible under a curtain of dirty white hair. Leaves and dried mud clung to the dire strands. I am Captain Firesworn, representative of the Argent Dawn, to speak with you about your loyalties. She said nothing. He wasn't even sure she could hear him. Will you speak and defend yourself from execution? A thinly veiled threat to coax a reaction. The knights who had pulled away from Arthas each made a show about being broken free from his will and declared loyalty to Mograine. The elf wished to see if she would do the same under duress. No executions had taken place. Chaos was being controlled following the battle and the alliances forged between us and the new faction. However, any still claiming fealty to the Lich King would certainly not live long around here. The Death Knights knew this. Still, she did nothing. It daunted him slightly. who, while he may not admit it, was still shaken from that morning. He couldn't afford to be cowed by this. Standing up, he quietly drew his sword, holding it briefly to wait a comfort in his scarred hands. With one swift movement, he banged it against the cage bars, the clanging echoing off the stone walls in protest. The woman didn't even flinch. Was she even alive? Suppressing a sigh of exhaustion, he sheathed his blade and moved to unlock the cage. If she was waiting for a chance to escape, this would be that time. The lack of reaction, however small, was enough to prove that she was either dead or unable to respond in a fashion that would grant her the strength to attempt an escape. He opened the cage door. After a minute of no movement, he entered and ungraciously swept her up to standing, by way of grabbing her upper arms, his dirt-caked armour groaning at the movements. She held her weight, proving she was indeed alive, but her head remained bowed. She was smaller and thicker than he expected for an elf, perhaps reaching chest height on himself. A quick sweep of her body revealed no obvious wounds or injuries. After a small shake and loudly talking in her direction, he concluded that mentally she wasn't there. A shame. Stepping backwards, he released her, and to his surprise and relief, she didn't slump back into a pile on the floor. Her stature sagged, but no other movement took place. In all of his time on the battlefield, he had never quite seen a reaction like it. Shock, yes. Terror, naturally. Denial, practically a given. But this was something entirely different, and he had no idea what to do. Backing out of the cage, he locked the door and retreated from the church. It wasn't until he was outside that he realised just how cold it had been in there, and given that this was the height of summer, even the inside of the building shouldn't have felt so frigid. Walking to the newly erected healers' tents, he passed a number of injuries and near fatalities. The number of wounded was too many to fit into the makeshift infirmary, and the already tired healers had to make do fixing and bandaging outside with them. Only the severely wounded were treated within. Such was the organisation of the remedial team. A few people nodded in his direction, his higher rank and reputation earning him the respect of all who served under and beside him. Judging by the ease of the pace in which the menders and physicians moved, the majority of the dire cases had been dealt with. Good. Reaching the biggest tent, a large green cross dominating the sides, he entered and spoke with the head of the healers. After being chastised for disturbing her work, he left with a promise that she would send two of her best to see to the strange prisoner currently residing in the chapel uphill. They would also provide a thick blanket and food and water to her while she was confined. Pleased with this result, he returned to his own tent area to complete plans with the other commanding officers regarding the current situation and how to deal with the new information currently flooding their way via the Death Knights. Mograine and High Lord Fordring were currently standing far apart from the makeshift camp. They were deep in conversation, though champions of both factions stood nearby in case anything should break out. This new truce was certainly tentative and placed a small dampener on the victory for the dawn. Trusting his ultimate superior to do what was right for the people, he made his way to the canvas sheltering a table littered with parchments and maps, with three others scribbling away. Rubbing his eyes with one hand, he braced himself for the mountain of paperwork no doubt headed his way, starting with the roster and death tolls gained today. It wasn't until dark, when fires lit the campsite and people milled and slept, weary from the fight, that peace seemed truly possible. Even though an edge from the fortress floating above, the looming threat was dimmed by the Alliance force this day, allowing everyone to relax and rest. So when screams emitted from the echoes of the halls making up the chapel, that already fragile peace was shattered once more. Having not slept, he was forced into action to reach and thrust open the doors. The light of two torches littered on the ground took a moment to adjust to. The sight was not one he expected. A man, human, was backed into a corner on the far side, and his dwarven companion was face down on the floor, weeping. Their smocks identified them as the two healers requested. Priests, in fact, but that wasn't the most obvious thing in this scene. It was that the woman had looked up sharply at his entrance, scurried to the back of the cage, and shielded herself with her arms. It was the most movement he had seen of her, And the most shocking thing wasn't this transformation of her apparent consciousness. It was the terrified look in her lifeless white eyes as she had laid her gaze on him. 3 others arrived and immediately sprang into action. 2 headed toward the distraught men, and a 3rd cried out in rage, aiming crossbow for the cage. Before the captain could issue an order, the wire twanged and the bolt plunged straight into her chest. He grabbed the weapon from his subordinate and ordered for him to stand down and get outside, shoving him hard in the meanwhile. This was too small a place for violence, and he acted without precedent. Throwing the bolt to the side, he ran to the cage and hurriedly unlocked it. Surveying the wound, he saw no blood, but her look of disbelief was evidence as she stared at the foreign object protruding from her body. He swore. He may not have known what had occurred here, but if she died well under Dawn custody, until her loyalties were confirmed, that most certainly wouldn't go down well with the Ebon Blade. Even more so if she was in fact sworn to them now. He was halfway to picking her up and running to the infirmary when she did something unheard of. She reached and pulled the arrow straight out of her body. The elf beside her stared in shock. No blood, no tissue or muscle was attached to the arrowhead. It was clean and undamaged, at least until she threw it on the floor. All he could do was gape. Sobbing healers were led out of the church, no indication given by any of the 3 about what had occurred previous to the others' arrival, though the later reports stated that no physical injuries were detected. The woman or girl, she seemed rather young despite her haunted expression, adamantly refused to leave the cage, ushering out anyone who came in and sitting stubbornly on the floor. It was the second bizarre thing to happen in such a short period of time.
I saw faces, young faces, old and wrinkled ones, others lined with creases of hard work and labour. A variety of races, skin tones, ages, they kept flashing in my mind's eye. All of them had one thing in common. Each expression and every man, woman and child was pure terror, and all the eyes would be transfixed on my gaze. Each time I closed her eyes, they were there, haunting me, scaring me. Rest refused to come, and even sheer exhaustion was no escape. I didn't know these faces, yet I remembered them vividly. There were numerous people, far too many to count, and they were all staring deep into the very recesses of my soul. I slowly lost my mind. I heard the screams, yet I didn't listen to them. Echoes in the back of my mind, begging, daring and challenging, always flashes of images, never anything long or real, always ending in sprays and showers of red. The vague sense of moving bothered me, but I didn't register why or how. The images were coming in quick succession, faster than anything I had experienced before. I couldn't keep up with the jumbled mess. My own mind held me trapped, and I had no way out. Until now. Waking up brought a little illumination into my eyes, cold to my skin and dampened my mouth. Screams reached my ears. It took a short while for my head to catch up to what I was seeing, and even then I couldn't be sure I wasn't hallucinating. 2 people, men, were backing away from me, crying out and stumbling backwards, their fear-filled eyes trained in my direction. At me. It wasn't unlike everything I had witnessed in my own mind, except these were solid and very, very real. The door was blown wide and a large column of light poured through. My arms threw up by instinct to shield from this, almost as if burned rather than blinded. Calls, shouts and cries all overwhelmed my head, and I couldn't even think straight. It wasn't until a hard thunk knocked me further into what appeared to be a cage that I gathered my senses. I reached down and did the only thing that seemed appropriate. I pulled the offending object straight from my body and neatly examined it. Something wasn't right with it, but no finger could I place on the wrongness of what I was looking at. A feeling of ill ebbed at my mind, but I ignored it. I held peace only for a moment, and then it hit me. The arrow fell from my hand. I wasn't sure how much time had passed, but no amount of coaxing was going to get me to move. I was not going to leave this confinement by the light. My revelation of horror was enough to wake my mind up enough to realize that I couldn't leave this cage for the sake of the people around me. I was a monster, and they didn't understand that. There was no evidence of a wound on that arrow or on me where it had pierced. Blood should have dripped from the tip, beat unevenly from my own chest, and I should have faded slowly, but I didn't, and it was for one horrific despicable reason. I was dead, and I was dangerous.
Okay, I'm sure you will have noticed by now that when I started reading the part where it was from the female elf's perspective, I made a slight change to my normal voice. Not just with the echo, but I actually, I think I increased the pitch. I'm not too sure. I know how I did it. I can repeat the effect. I just don't know how to explain it. Thank you for listening. As always, remember, play the game and game to play.